Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tevin. I'm the Kickstart executive here at Pathway CTM. I'll be facilitating the session today. Just before passing over to Mark and James, I want to turn your attention to our Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. If you have any burning questions that you'd like to ask during the presentation, do feel free to do so. However, we will be having a Q&A session at the end where you'll be able to ask any questions you'd like the answer to. If you're watching this call recorded, do feel free to email any questions you have at student@pathwayctm.com. That's student@pathwayctm.com. But without further ado, Mark, James, over to you guys.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Tevin, and morning, everybody out there. Just as a note, obviously, I'm going to be talking to a screen and with James over the next half an hour, and obviously we're not able to see you. Tevin's mentioned about the questions, so hopefully we'll put some questions in the comment box, and then we'll have a chance to talk about those at the end. Just introduce myself first. My name is Mark Bentley. I'm a landscape architect. And I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to come and talk to you this morning about geography and the landscape professions. And I also have a colleague, James Berman, who works for Litchfield's consultancy. James, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm James Berman. I'm a town planner, and yeah, working for Litchfields, who are town planning consultants, and we're also, Mark will come on to it, but working on the South Kilburn scheme.
Great, thanks, James. So, really pleased to come and talk to you today. I think the kind of heading or the title of the kind of session is Geography in the Landscape Professions. I'd say geography was probably one of my favourite lessons at school. I think geography, sport, and perhaps biology were the things I enjoyed most when I was at school. And geography has actually played a really massive part in the rest of my education when I went to university, and then in my career as well. And we'll be talking a little bit about that today, and what geography, how that connects to various jobs in the industry of placemaking and home building. I wasn't quite sure if you guys would be able to see me. I think you can see me on screen, so it's fine. There's a nice cheesy picture of me as well. But yeah, I'm principal landscape architect at a company called the Environment Partnership. And I think it's worth saying here, I think when I was at school, I didn't know what a landscape architect was. I didn't know that landscape architects necessarily existed. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that through work, through my job, I got to meet landscape architects, and I saw it as a career. And then I actually changed career and went from doing something else to becoming a landscape architect, just retraining in my late 20s, and I became a landscape architect about 11 years ago when I was 30. But fundamentally, landscape architects design outdoor spaces. They imagine ideas and what outdoor spaces might look like. So that could be parks, that could be squares, that could be public streets, that might be nature reserves, all of these outdoor spaces. In a very similar way that architects obviously design buildings and structures, landscape architects will design the space in between. And today I'm also going to talk about a couple of other professions, and James is going to chip in as well, because there's landscape managers and there's also landscape planners. There's other people involved in the design and management of those areas between the buildings, and also wild and natural areas as well, like nature reserves and wild spaces, national parks, those sorts of things. Just a little bit about the company I work for. So it's an environmental consultancy called the Environment Partnership, or TP for short. And on the screen are lots of images and some words about all the different services that we provide as a company. So these are all jobs and professions. So things like town planning and environmental assessment, master planning, with people who look at the historic environments, their historic buildings, and look at their preservation. People who look at mapping and GIS. So they go in and look in real detail at quite a large scale at how the world works. And I just say, in fact, pretty much every area of work that we do and every profession that's on the screen now, all of those have a link to geography. Many of the people who work in my organisation, we're probably an organisation of somewhere around 150 to 200 people who work for the Environment Partnership. I would be surprised. I would have thought at least 50% probably study geography to quite a late stage in their education, whether that's university or maybe their A-levels. So geography can have a fantastic kind of link through into a whole wide range of careers. The other thing to say is all these are kind of environmentally focused. There's obviously big focus on the environment, on climate change, on these types of big issues that we're all you'll be learning about school, and I colleagues will be dealing with every day in our jobs. And so that's, I guess, our focus for our company, is that we focus very much on those things connected to the environment, conserving the environment, and improving the environment. I don't know if you've been to other sessions this week, but I know a number of other colleagues who are involved in projects in Kilburn. So James and myself, architects, engineers, various professions involved in designing new homes and new open spaces in South Kilburn. The image on screen is the one we're working on currently, which is just north of Kilburn Open Space. And this is actually only part of the list of jobs and professions that are involved in these projects. So I know you've probably, if you've been to the other sessions, already heard from architects and engineers. Myself as a landscape architect, my colleagues, landscape managers, landscape planners. I also work with ecologists and arboriculturists, which are on that list. And I think my colleague Jonathan did one of these presentations yesterday morning. So either if you were there or if you weren't there and you want to find out more about managing trees, arboriculture, then I'm sure you can see the video of that. And then there's urban designers, cost consultants, people who think about how much these buildings and landscapes are going to cost to build and whether they're affordable. And then lots of people who come in and think about sustainability. So they might think about how these new homes are heated, how they're powered, and how that can be done in a more sustainable, more environmentally friendly way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscape disciplines, landscape architecture, landscape management, and landscape planning. And then obviously James is a planning consultant working on the scheme. James, do you want to just say a little bit about what landscape consultant, planning consultant does?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think as Mark's mentioned, a couple of my colleagues, Alan and Ben, did a presentation on Monday, which you might have seen. Focusing on how English, I think, links with planning, town planning, but I think geography as well. I think similarly to Mark, well over 50% probably of our company will have studied geography at some point, especially at degree level. But we'll basically, as kind of a kind of overseer almost, we'll work with all the other consultants mentioned there to ensure that their inputs and designs meet the specific kind of policy requirements that are set out by the local councils and the government, so that the scheme ultimately gets planning permission, which is needed for it to be built. I think that's the simplest way of saying that, and I'll talk a bit more detail a bit later about it.
Great, thanks, James. So you'll have had presentations from a number of these disciplines. As I say, there's safety consultants, there's fire consultants, there's all sorts of other people who are involved in these projects. Design teams might often have 20 more people on around the table discussing and coming up with solutions and design ideas for these schemes. So just to quickly go over the aim for this session. Obviously, the first thing which we started to do is to introduce how studying geography can help lead to employment in jobs related to home building and placemaking. See, placemaking being a particularly important part of my work as a landscape architect. We'll have a quick look at the path to working as a landscape architect, a landscape manager, or a landscape planner, and James also mentioned about becoming a planning consultant. And then a little bit of introduction to what it's like to work in one of these professions. Obviously, this is just a half-hour session. What I would like to flag up is there's a website which I include the link in the slides, but it's called chooselandscape.org, and it's a website set up by the Landscape Institute, which is a body that represents landscape architects and landscape managers. There's lots of really useful information on that about the professions and how you get involved in working your way from school to becoming either a landscape manager, a landscape planner, urban designer, or a landscape manager. And obviously, we're making the link to geography today. I really enjoyed studying geography, and fundamentally, geography is that study of places and relationships between people and the environments that they live and work in. So a couple of pictures on this slide. The one at the bottom left is of the area just north of King's Cross Station. So lots and lots of development around King's Cross in the last kind of 10 to 20 years. And this is showing people enjoying the kind of amphitheatre setting that landscape architects have designed and engineers in and around the canal just north of King's Cross Station. And you see how people love, I mean, people do love being near water. So this has got, there's offices here, there's obviously people coming into King's Cross Station who are tourists or visitors, there's shops, there's all sorts of things happening in this space. And geography is about that relationship between people and spaces, and landscape architecture is about understanding that relationship between how people use these spaces and how they want to use these spaces, and what people love in spaces like being near water and greenery, and trying to create spaces that make the most of that, and create a kind of wonderful space for people's health, for their well-being, for socializing, for going out and meeting friends, family, those sorts of things. So that's the bottom left image. We also I work, the bottom right image is of Black Park Country Park. It's a country park just west of London, near Slough. It's a big area of forested land with heathland, lots of really important ecosystems, really important habitats with specialist wildlife. So just where those people are cycling, they might not wander off into the heather, or they might do if they're interested. They might find reptiles like Adam. They might go and look in some of the ponds and find some unusual newts. Really specialist bits of wildlife that live in these habitats. But as I say, this is just north of Slough, and lots of people want to go there and explore and get on their bikes and enjoy that space. And so there's a pressure between managing a natural space, a space for wildlife, but also getting people out and enjoying the kind of natural environment and health and well-being, and getting on a bike and enjoying themselves and going for a walk, taking their dogs for a walk. And so quite a lot of the job that we do outside of cities and towns and cities is looking at that kind of relationship between recreational spaces, where people go to have relaxing fun, and the natural environment. Just a quick look at syllabus topics, things you might have covered if you're studying geography. Obviously things like physical landscapes, resource management, natural hazards, urban issues and challenges, changing economic world, climate change, ecosystems, all things that I would have studied even though I was at school quite a while ago. And just a few thoughts about how those particular syllabus topics kind of link to landscape. Obviously, think about physical landscapes, mountainous areas, coastal areas, and then at the same time think about something like resource management. So you have to think very carefully now, because of climate change, about how we're making energy. So when my granddad was little, he was a coal miner up in Yorkshire, and that would have been a main way of taking a resource out of the ground, using that in coal-fired power stations to produce electricity. Now, obviously, we're very aware of the impacts of burning fossil fuels, burning coal, and their impacts on climate change. And so we have different ways and we have different problems we need to solve. So in this case, we have to think about wind turbines and capturing the energy from wind. And how does putting all these wind turbines fit with a physical landscape, a big mountainous area or a hilly area? Obviously fantastic because there's lots of wind to capture, but possibly sensitive sites visually. These are obviously national parks, really interesting spaces, beautiful spaces, and some people will feel obviously quite negative towards some of these structures going up. There's challenges that landscape architects and others planners would have to consider, landscape planners. This image is of a scheme I did a previous job. I'm now working mostly on new housing developments like the ones in South London, but previously I used to work on improving existing housing estates in and around London. This is one in Hammersmith. And so you'll have studied, or you'll be studying things like natural hazards, and one of the big natural hazards that we face in this country is flooding. And it's a major issue for urban areas, particularly London. And with climate change, we're going to get more storms, we're going to get heavier rain, and more likely to get surface water flooding. So this was a scheme we did where we were trying to create these little spaces, these little basins, these little pockets in the landscape where the water can go, basically. So keeping footpaths and houses dry and not flooded, and using the landscape as a place to take any flood water. And I would say on every scheme I'm working on currently, or project I'm working on, we have to think about flooding. We have to think about how we're going to manage the water, the rainfall that's going to land within that scheme, and particularly how we can manage it in the landscape. So the other thing to say on economics here is this scheme is all about how we could put these features into existing landscapes and housing estates, but do it in a really cost-effective way, so in an inexpensive way. So these things don't cost particularly much to do, and we were demonstrating how we could do that, manage water in a sustainable and also kind of quite a cheap way to deliver these schemes as well. So another example of that is just little things like little green roofs and trying to avoid overheating. It's another issue with climate change. So we were doing a lot of these small green roofs on bin stalls and pram sheds, in this case, creating kind of beautiful little wildlife habitats, but doing it in a kind of cost-effective way and tackling climate change. And then this is another image of the park I mentioned, Black Park. And this is the kind of heathland pool. Lots of specialist wildlife lives in here. And again, as I said, it's managing primarily the ecosystems, the wildlife that lives, and how do we protect it? But this park being right next to Slough, being right next to West London, lots and lots of people, especially now since coronavirus came about, lockdown, lots and lots more people are going out and enjoying open spaces and parking spaces. And we need to look at that challenge that's created by urban areas and go and look at the landscape and understand how do we protect sensitive wildlife here while also creating a fantastic place for people to go and enjoy recreation. So we'll set the water. So now I'm just going to do a kind of quick introduction to different professions and start with my own profession. I'm a landscape architect. So this is text taken from the chooselandscape.org website, a really good place to go and look at if having seen today's presentation, something you think you might want to think about in the future. So landscape architects imagine what an outdoor space can become, and they use their creative skills to solve problems and make it happen. So landscape's a really interesting mix of some science, some geography, certainly history comes into it very importantly. We do a lot of writing, we have to write quite a few reports and think about that, so the English is very important. When we're designing landscapes, we're thinking about what we can fit in and how many houses we can get and how we can make gardens work, and there's a lot of measurements, quite a lot of maths, and thinking about levels as well. So there's lots of subjects that contribute to it, but geography being a key one. The images on this slide of the Olympic Park. Olympic Park's probably one of the biggest construction projects in recent years, and certainly a massive project in terms of landscape architecture. And I think it kind of made people aware of what landscape architects do, who they are. So this part of East London being previously a kind of industrial area, very little access to the River Lee that runs through it, lots of polluted ground, polluted river. And then through the Olympic bid and through all the work that architects and landscape architects and many other disciplines we mentioned did, we've now created these beautiful parkland spaces, fantastic sports facilities as well. And that's what I mean. It's about people who did this, the landscape architects involved and the other disciplines have to imagine what this space might be like. They walk onto site and they see an industrial site, they see lots of rubble, they see old roads and bits of concrete and old fencing, and they have to see beyond that and think, okay, it's a big area of land. We've got a magnificent project in terms of the Olympics coming to London. There's a river running through here. People love being near water. And they have to see beyond the kind of things they're seeing right in front of them. They have to understand, what that space can become. They have to imagine how that outdoor space can be improved. And then, obviously, you can see an image. Many of you have obviously possibly been to Olympic Park, but fantastic new spaces, riverside walks, nice. You can walk right up against the water. You can walk around the stadiums, plazas, all sorts of spaces, play areas that people can go and enjoy. And these are the types of things that landscape architects produce. So just thinking about the kind of person that might be interested in a landscape architect, you need to be creative, to use your imagination, maybe have some artistic skills in terms of being able to draw your ideas on paper or using new digital packages to do that on computers. But you have to be able to imagine that landscape in your mind and then be able to draw that and explain that to other people to convince them that your idea is a good one. There's lots and lots of tricky problems to solve in landscape projects. How we're going to drain the land, how we're going to fit all the houses in that we need to fit in, how do we make enough parkland, how do we get the sports facilities, all these types of things. So lots and lots of competing pressures when you're designing landscape projects. So you need to be a bit of a problem solver. One of my own interests has always been the environment and protecting the environment. And I think that's one of the key drivers I got into being a landscape architect. And then other skills like being good with numbers and money. Obviously, you have to design schemes that are affordable and that clients can build. So you have to understand how much they'll cost. And we have to go and inspire, I guess, other people, local communities to see what we see in terms of this idea for this space and communicate that to them and get their support for what we're doing. Great thing with all the landscape disciplines is you're not stuck inside. I mean, I'm stuck in my little room at home at the minute, but I spend quite a lot of time, mostly I guess before coronavirus, I've been out on site a lot. I've been going out and being in open spaces and all weathers, and so if you're someone who likes to be outside, it's a really, really interesting career. You need a mixture of academic and creative qualifications, so things like art and sciences, as I mentioned, geography, you need some maths. These are all subjects that support or kind of a career in landscape architecture. You need at least 3 A levels, and to become a landscape architect, you need to go to university. But the most important thing is demonstrating your ideas, and so all architects, landscape architects, other designers have to have a portfolio that show our drawings and our ideas, photographs, those sorts of things. I'm just going to very quickly go through, you can guess my age now, you've got my birthday and the current dates and how old I am, but just how I became a landscape architect very quickly. So I went to school, I did my GCSEs in 1996, and I included maths and English geography. I didn't actually do art, I studied art outside of school, but I didn't do art at GCSE. Just as a bit of relevance for today, there's this for Gareth Southgate in 1996, so the last time we were in a semi-final of the European Championships. There was Gareth missing a penalty, and it was pretty sad. I was pretty devastated. I was trying to get over that and get ready for my exams at the time. I then went on and say at school where I was, my local comprehensive, I then went and did A-levels in geography, biology and chemistry. As I say, the geography bit is very much, and the biology experience is carried through into my job now. Went off to university the first time, and I studied something called environmental management. So my first degree was a mixture of physical geography and environmental sciences, so hydrology and ecology, soil science, these types of things. So trying to understand how the climate works and those types of things. So it was a mixture of 2 subjects. And I got a degree in environmental management. Then became an environmental consultant. So I spent the first 10 years of my life writing reports and advising other consultants who were designers, so engineers, architects, landscape architects, how they could make their schemes more environmentally sound. And so I spent about 10 years, my first 10 years of my career doing that. And I enjoyed it, it was good, but I was sat around design team tables, writing reports, giving spreadsheets, and just seeing architects and landscape architects and thinking I want to be one of the ones that does the design itself. They get a lot of control. If you're a designer, you can make the decisions, you can come up with the ideas. So I kind of saw that and thought, well, I wish I'd known about landscape architecture while I was at school, and then I probably would have done something slightly different when I went to university. But there's always a kind of chance to change. So at that point, I didn't have any kids. So I went back to university and I studied for a certificate in landscape design. So this was like a starting point. It was a way for me to change from my previous job to kind of move towards becoming a landscape architect. I did that for a year, and then I did a year of a master's in landscape architecture. And that master's is the thing that enables me to be a chartered landscape architect now and work in the profession. So I went back to university for two years. I worked part-time at the same time. And then obviously I became a landscape architect. And I've been a landscape architect since, well, broadly speaking, for the last 10, 11 years. And I'm hoping tonight I see Gareth Southgate looking like that, and not the Gareth Southgate that I saw in 1996 when I started when I was doing my exams. Landscape managers, I'm going to skip through these a little bit because of the time, but landscape architects are designing those spaces. Landscape managers work very closely with us, but they then have to look at how, once those landscapes and gardens and parks and streets have been constructed, how they're going to be managed. So think about managing the paving, the planting, the structures in those spaces. And so they tend to be experts on plants and human behavior and how people use those spaces. And then they have to provide advice on how they should be managed and looked after. Similarly to landscape architects, tend to be a lover of nature, comfortable, being out and about and working with lots of different people, practical people on site. So often they're managing spaces and they have to work with people out on site, doing the management in this case, and some streaming down the bottom, or you might even be people managing it. But in the case of the heathland I mentioned previously in Black Park, you get cows in to eat some of the vegetation instead. Even more so than landscape architects, you'll spend a lot more time outside in all weathers. Got to be quite practical and hands-on, I think, to become a landscape manager. And obviously perhaps less creative. It's more about managing the space and less about coming up with ideas for the space in the first place. Day-to-day things that landscape managers do. So they will go out to public open spaces, parklands, squares, streets, and carry out some assessments, see how they're working, see how they're managed. And then they'll write reports and make recommendations on how they can be managed better. And they'll list all the operations and things. This is just a little extract from a landscape management plan we just produced, where you're setting the priorities. You're saying, okay, if you're going to make this landscape better, the people managing it need to do this, and this, and setting lists. You also have to be very aware of the funding, so you need you need to try and come up with lists and approaches to managing the land that people can afford to do. So it's a general thing with all these disciplines. You have to be very aware of how much it costs to do these things, and you have to be very good at going and meeting and chatting to people and understanding the problems they face on site, the practical problems, and helping them to solve those. And then landscape planners. This is going up a scale. So landscape architects tend to work on a particular site, so a housing site, a nature reserve, a length of new street or cycleway or something like that. It's very specific. It tends to have a very clear boundary. Landscape planners will think bigger picture. So this is an example of a scheme that we're involved in near Basingstoke. It's creating a whole new community. So the kind of little kind of grey blobs that you can see are proposed areas for new housing. The green areas at the top are existing fields. There's going to be country parks. I think down the bottom you can just make out some football pitches. The landscape planners are thinking a lot bigger scale, not the detail of how those homes and gardens will be designed, but how the housing, the roads, the parklands, the sports facilities, how do they all work together to create a new space, a new community. That's what landscape planners do. Again, it's still a creative angle to it, perhaps less detailed creative than landscape architects, but very much thinking about the kind of wider use, how people use spaces, which is obviously a key lesson you get out of geography. So those things I mentioned, big picture thinker. True, you might be a bit of a data geek, with an eye for patterns and trends. How are people using these spaces? How do they work? Taking the numbers, crunching numbers, and trying to understand what that means for the space. You have to be able to, if you're creating a new development like that with new housing, new parks, you need to be able to convince and inspire all sorts of people, local people, other designers and consultants. You have to kind of sell your ideas and your vision for a space, which is really, really important. And again, an outdoor, indoor kind of job. You'll be outside in the weather sometimes, things like visits. The images here are landscape visual impact assessment. So another aspect of the job for landscape planners is looking at what the impact of new development would be. So this is a kind of waterside development in Bristol. And that's the current setting at the top. And then you can see there's a computer generated image of how the new housing in this case would look in that space. And they try to go for kind of wharf feel along the edge of the boats. But people will think about that. So they think about viewpoints and how changes in the landscape will affect how people enjoy the space. So that's called landscape visual impact assessment. If you're a landscape planner, you're going to be thinking big. You're going to be making plans, spaces, maps, thinking about photographs, going out and doing site visits. You're going to be coordinating other people's design and getting them to not always think about the detail, but think about the bigger picture of the community that they're developing, reading plans, checking, talking to communities, all those types of things in the day-to-day job of a landscape planner. And I think, James, you're just going to mention a few things now about planning more generally rather than just landscape planning.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, compared to kind of a landscape planner, we as town planners kind of focus more on the overall scheme rather than one specific area. So we'll work with the architects, engineers, ecologists, archaeological consultants, heritage consultants, landscape architects, arboriculturists who deal with the trees, kind of the whole wider team, I suppose, to ensure what they are preparing will be acceptable, meet the council's planning policy. So this means we kind of have a kind of basic knowledge of these areas without being experts in them, in order to make sure that as a whole, looking kind of broadly over the scheme, it's going to pass the council's requirements when it's submitted. So with South Kilburn, we also have to regularly liaise with the council themselves, organise meetings, and get council feedback on, things like daylight sunlight impacts or the actual design themselves, or just the overall scheme, whatever is contentious for that particular project. We'll be discussing that with the council and feeding that back to the team and architects to inform their design as it kind of progresses. And ultimately, at the end of the kind of project journey, we'll collate all the team's reports, plans, and drawings in order to submit this all as one planning application to the council, who will then assess the application against their own planning policy, and then either hopefully grant the application or refuse it, which ultimately, obviously, means whether we build it out or not. And in terms of how town planning relates to geography, obviously Mark mentioned the syllabus topics that were mentioned earlier, and planning would definitely be covered under the kind of urban issues and challenges section. And broadly, geography can be split into physical and human geography, and planning would obviously very much sit in the human side of that, which leads many planners to study this at university for studying town planning. And in terms of my career timeline, for example, I did geography at GCSE and then at A level, and then I went to did that human geography degree at undergraduate, and then a postgraduate degree in town planning to enable me to be a chartered town planner. And then obviously I joined Lichfields, and Lichfields is a private consultancy, but as a town planner you can also work for a variety of employers in different sectors. So that could be the local council, like London Borough of Brent, or house builders. So it could be in-house at Barratt Homes, for example, or in wider kind of more overarching government organisations like this, the Planning Inspectorate or the Greater London Authority, who are kind of create those overarching policy details, or have a kind of overview say on planning as a whole. And back to you, Mark.
That's great, thanks, James. I think that's James made a good point there. It's not, we both currently work for private organisations. I've worked for charities in the past, and certainly all the jobs, these landscape jobs as well as planning, they're all a job that you could do for a council, for a local authority, or for some other public body, as well as private companies. So there's a real variety of jobs out there. And there's lots of jobs out there, and there's also demand for people working in these professions, which is an important thing. I think obviously when you're at school and you might not, it feels a little way off still, possibly getting a job, but there's lots of these are really, really interesting jobs to do. I do love my job, and as it stresses, but I generally love my job, and I would encourage anybody to look into these careers if these are the types of things that you're interested in, and geography is a subject you're interested in. And then just to finish off, there's other things as well which apply. These are off our website, but it would apply to lots of other consultants. There's things about being in a job generally, about timeliness, being honest, obviously representing our clients. So people are paying us to do this work, and we need to understand what they need when we're working for them or talking on their behalf. We're obviously representing them, and so it's really important that we're honest with the work we're doing, and if there are problems, we make clear what those problems are and try and sort them out. We're working in teams all the time. So James and I sit on South Kilburn. We sit on a design team. In fact, we've got a meeting tomorrow, and there'll probably be a call like this, a Zoom call, and there'll be 20 of us on it, and we'll have to take our time to talk about some other issues and things that we're working on, and get other people's support for what we're trying to do, and or help us to resolve some problems. So it's really important to be supportive and courteous and respectful of other people. I don't think it's true of any job, but it's good to be passionate about it. It's good to do a job, if you can, that you're interested in, that relates to things that you enjoyed at school. And I think in terms of part of the reason I became a landscape architect is it's a job that is tackling some of the big issues that we're facing as a world, particularly kind of climate change. But if you look within the country and provide new housing for people, these are really important kind of national issues, and it's really enjoyable working in a career that helps tackle some of those issues that we're facing. I think that kind of sums it up really in terms of professional values as well. And that just left me any questions. The reason I put this slide in was just, this is a slightly blurry photo of just a local project near our office that a while back I kind of helped out with a local sculptor who worked with lots and lots of local people to carve in stone various pieces. Anybody could come along and be involved in these kind of workshops, and then this artist put them all together into this kind of sculpture that was then put in a garden that we created, and this was kind of the launch day, and lots of people coming out. And I think there's there's interest and joy and success in getting, say, a planning application through, as James mentioned. So you've been working on something for months and then it gets approved and you know it's going to be built. That's great, but you can be involved in smaller scale things as well and work directly with kind of people in a local community to kind of create something interesting too. So you get really good feedback, I think, from the job. You design something, you see it get built, and you realise it, and you can walk and go and show people and say, look, I was involved in that in my career. Kevin, back to you.
That was a brilliant presentation. I was absolutely engaged with it. I'm very much interested to see the architecture of London in the coming years, which will be quite interesting. And my partner also, she's an ecologist, and so we're constantly having conversations about landscaping too. So definitely very interesting. There's a few questions actually that I've wanted to ask, but if anyone has questions, do feel free to ask them also in the Q&A box. My first question is, what's a typical day like for both of you? Is there a routine that you follow, or is every day different?
I'd say, obviously, Kevin, since for us, obviously since the coronavirus pandemic, we've been obviously, for everybody in society, things have changed and school's different and everything. So for the minute, working at home. I have a team call with I work in the London office and there's 7 of us, so we all get on a call like this, and this morning we talk through our work and try and understand what we're doing the day ahead. But then after that, it'll be a real mix. I've got a meeting this afternoon, a design team meeting, and I like to, after this, produce some quick sketches to explain some ideas on a new project that we're looking at. Other times, my colleagues were out yesterday in Oxfordshire, looking at one site that we were just about to work on. So they're going to a kind of a site that's just blank at the minute, and they're trying to think about the ideas that we need to consider when we're designing this new landscape space. And then they went to visit another site which has just recently been finished, and they went to take some photographs to see, what it looked like and how the finished product was looking, and how people were enjoying it based on the community that now live there. So a housing project. So there's this. I'd say since coronavirus, it's been more desk-based because we spend less time out on site because everybody's doing travel. Yeah. But prior to that, normal, when life gets back to something closer to normal, I'd be out and about 1 or 2 days a week, probably out on site. Like I say, doing some drawings, reading reports, seeing other drawings from people that sent. James?
Yeah, I think with COVID, I'd probably be out on site less than you would, but I do get out occasionally. But usually my day is fairly similar-ish, obviously, but it varies because of we work on lots of different projects. So that'll be the variety in the day, and then within that day, it could be meetings either externally with clients or internally to discuss those projects. So like Mark mentioned, we've got our design team meeting tomorrow on South Kilburn, and then out with that, then just the general tasks that we'll have to do. So for example, on South Kilburn, I'll be starting to write our planning statement soon, so that'll take quite a lot of time. So it's finding time for that, and then general questions that come in kind of crop up every day, and it'll be research to do with that and planning policy, looking at local councils, and also just time liaising with, writing emails to planning officers or teams and answering various queries. Sounds very mundane now, but yeah.
It's pretty varied though. I think that spreads over it. Like our jobs are pretty, you're not just sat kind of churning out the same thing over and over again. There'll be meetings and then reports to read and drawings to produce and things to review, and they're pretty varied jobs.
Interesting. And just coming back to you, Mark, you mentioned that you retrained around your 20s, or your mid-20s rather.
Yeah.
I'm quite interested to know, how's your role changed since you first started at least?
Yeah, so I think it's odd when you change career because you kind of start again. So yeah, when I was an environmental consultant, I'd gone to university and I'd studied and I started my job, and as you do in jobs, you kind of work your way up, and I'd kind of got to a similar place as I am now, but as an environmental consultant. And then just, I thought about the fact that I'll be working for 40 years and thought, okay, well, I like what I do, but do I love what I do? Could I be doing something else? And I'd obviously seen these other jobs as a result of working in an organisation where there were landscape architects, and I thought it looked interesting. I did a little evening course as well, just went along to an evening school in Bromley just to find out a bit more about landscape architecture and spoke to the guy teaching there, and then decided to make the leap and go back to university. Obviously, in my late 20s, and it was great. It's good. I mean, university's fantastic either way, but it was quite nice going back in my late 20s because I had a different view on it. I'd already worked, and I kind of made a thought, this is something I wanted to do. And as I say, I think I didn't have that at school because I didn't know that you could become a landscape architect. No one had spoken to me about it before. Nobody had introduced it as a profession, as a job. So I had to come to it in a different way. And then since I started, obviously I had to go back down to the bottom of the ladder pretty much. I was able to kind of get up the ladder a bit faster, perhaps the second time, just because, I had the experience of working, going into an office and working with other people and going to meetings, all those things that we all have to do every day in these jobs. I was used to doing and presenting and those types of things. But for me, I had to learn the design skills. So that idea that I wasn't going to write a report about what I thought anymore. I had to start getting a pen and getting a piece of paper and drawing those ideas. And I found it quite difficult to start with. I don't think having a background in geography and sciences and those types of things, I think more about how the space is used perhaps, and there are certainly better people who are fantastic hand drawing, or they can kind of sketch out an idea incredibly quickly. It takes me a little bit more time, but it doesn't stop me being a landscape architect, and I really enjoy that aspect of it as well when I do get time to do some drawing.
Sure, and just to conclude on that point, one of my, I suppose, my main responsibility in the role that I'm currently in is offering value, whether it's for students or employers. Offering value is a big part of what I do. And so just leaving, if you could both give, I suppose, one piece of advice to students who are wanting to get into your line of work, what would it be? James, we can start with you.
Piece of advice. I think, I think similar to Mark and what he just said, that I didn't know it was a career option until quite late on as well. And if you're interested in that kind of side of the geography, that urban environment and that side of things and maps, and it definitely, whether it's I think probably there's great career websites and stuff out there. Give it a Google, there's loads of description of what the day-to-day tasks are, what you might expect, all that kind of stuff, and look into it. And then if that tweaks your interest even more, then I'm sure there's evening kind of courses like Mark said, or contact a town planning consultancy and ask if you could do a day's kind of shadowing or work experience or anything like that, or see if you know anyone that is in that field and go along and experience it for a day. I think that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as well, I was thinking about, what gives you a kick, what gives you a buzz in terms of work. I enjoy designing something and seeing it, but there's an outcome. It's a physical thing. I can walk past it. I go back to some of my projects now, and some I'm less keen on because they weren't finished so well, and some I'm really happy with, and the ones that I'm really happy with, I love going back to and thinking, I was involved in that. So it's physical, you can see it. There's lots of jobs, and there's loads of great careers. So this isn't about one thing being better than another, but there's lots of careers where you're a little bit more distant from that. So you might advise someone, and that was partly with my first job. I advised someone who then designed something, and I felt a bit kind of remote from it, and I really enjoyed being a landscape architect, being able to actually put pen to paper and then working really hard to get that built and see something real, something practical, something visible that I can go and enjoy later. And obviously, as per the picture, lots of people can enjoy and be involved in the local community too.
Right. Well, I mean, that's honestly, that's a perfect way to conclude this presentation. If you do have any questions watching this back recorded, do feel free to email in at student@parkwayctm.com. That's student@parkwayctm.com. Mark, James, has been an absolutely brilliant presentation. Thank you so much on behalf of Parkway CTM, and thank you for everyone attending.
Thank you, everybody. It's been good. Take care.